All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, Meir and Rachel Gold, for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this month in memory of Yonah, Tzvi, Ben Yosef, Chaim, Elazar, HaKohen, Zichron Livracha, Noam Leah Efron, for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this month in celebration of the 98th birthday of Noam's grandfather, Yosef Hershel, Ben Mordechai Halevi. Our week of learning sponsor, Jack Bennett, in memory of Givati Brigade Lieutenant Assaf Rosenfeld, who fell in battle on February 26, 1998 in southern Lebanon, as well as our TALMUD TORAH sponsor, for the month of November also as well, Steve Golaskov and the schus of Refuah Shlema for his father, Nachum Sender Ben Ita Rachel. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH who have a refuah together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. With that, let us begin. So we have a lot to do today, an incredible daf ahead of us. I know I still owe you the Masachet B'Krovia from yesterday, but let's first, Emir Hashem, make a dent in today's daf, and Emir Hashem, hopefully we will go back. I have the page in front of me over here, so I'm not going to forget about it. So Mishnah, today's daf is Chav Gimel 23, and we are picking up Chav Beis 22b at the Mishnah. Barishoma Hayu Masiin Masuos. So we'll say in the beginning, they used to go ahead and light bonfires. Remember again, this is talking about how they would signal the diaspora communities that Rosh Chodesh had been declared. So they used to do it through a series of bonfires. Mishakilkulu hakusim, but when the kusim started trying to disrupt the system. Now, what I want to point out to you, remember again, we always see the kusim, right? Kusim are everywhere, right? So remember again, who were the kusim? So they were a nation from the land of, take a wild guess, Kusa, right? They were from Kusa. They were resettled in Eretz Yisrael by Shalmaneser, the king of Ashur. And there was, when they were idolaters, there was an outbreak of lions in Eretz Yisrael, which is very rare in Eretz Yisrael. They converted. But the problem is, even after their conversion, they were found to be worshipping idolatry. So there was a whole discussion about whether or not their conversion was a legitimate one or not. So that's why there's always this status issue when it comes to Kusim. So the Kusim tried to go ahead and mess up the system of Kiddush HaChodesh. Now I'll point out this something very interesting. So this is now the second Mishnah in a row that we see a group trying to disrupt Kiddush HaChodesh. Remember again, in last Mishnah, Usu, the Baitusim. And now remember again, it's interesting to note how everybody's trying to disrupt the system, right? So the Baitusim are disrupting it how? By showing up in Beis Din giving false testimony. The Kusim are disrupting it how? By lighting erroneous bonfires, or I should say unsanctioned, illegal bonfires. Now I say, what I'll point out over here is very interesting. See, the Baitusim, people didn't always know who Baitusim were. The Baitusim, the guy sitting next to you could be a Baitusi. Look to your right, look to your left, right? So meaning the Baitusim were very often embedded within the Jewish community. So a Baitusi shows up to give Eidos, you don't necessarily know who he is. Kusim were known. So Kusim would have never been accepted in a Beis Din. So therefore, again, their ability to undermine the system could never have been done in Beis Din. Therefore, that was done externally by the bonfires. So what happened? So the Baitusim, Hiskinush Yishluchun Yotzin. So they stopped the bonfire system. And instead they started dispatching messengers. So just by the way, the Gemara says, Mishnah says, so what was the process for the bonfires? So the Mishnah says, Mevian klunusos shal erez. They would bring poles of cedar wood, aruchim, long poles of cedar wood, vikanim and reeds, va'asei shemen and balsam wood, una ores shal pishtan and combed flax, the korech b'meshichan. They were tied all together with a string. Va'ola l'rosh hahar. You go up to the top of the mountain. Umatzis bahen es ha'or. They would light the fire. Umolech umevi uma'ala umorit. And they would go ahead, literally, molech umevi, wave it back and forth, wave it up and down. Ad shuras chaveru shu'osekim barosh harasheni. And we're going to see they had designated mountains. So you would go up, we're going to see the first mountain was Har Zeisim, right, Mount of Olives. That was the first mountain they went. So guy number one would start waving his torch, wait till you see on mountain number 2, V'chein barosh har ashlishi. And then it would continue on sequentially from mountain to mountain. Ume'ayin hayu masiin masuos. And from that, and again, from where, what mountains, there were designated mountains. Which mountains did they use for the bonfires? Mehara Mishcha l'Sartava. So both said the first mountain was Har Zeisim. Right, Harazesim. So remember again, one mountain over from Harabayis. Remember again, you have Harabayis, where the Beis HaMikdash is, valley, and then Harazesim right across, and then Sartava. We'll say you could actually go today. They've done this; it's incredible. You could take a jeep ride up to Sartava. We know the mountain. We know the mountain where this was, and it's absolutely incredible. It's a pretty steep. I mean, I guess you could hike it also, but you could take it's a lot fun. You could take a jeep ride up to Sartava as well. So they went from Har Mishka to Sartava, Sartava leGrufina, or Migrufina leChavran, or Mechavran leBeis Baltin. So we'll say, so these are the names of the mountains. Umi Beis Baltin lo zazu misham. Beis Baltin was the last designated mountain in Eretz Yisrael. And what happens? And from Beis Baltin lo zazu misham ela molech umevi ma'ala umorit ad shehayaroa es kalagola lefanav kimedura sa'ish. But how beautiful was this business, right? So Beis Baltin was the last mountain, and the guy at Beis Baltin would keep waving, and then what would happen is people would see. Now, after Beis Baltin, there was no organized system for where to light the bonfires. So it would just keep on lighting until people would see. One person would see, he would light a fire. A second person would see. And the image, I will say, is so beautiful that literally it looked like the entire diaspora was aglow. Right? So on that night, when they would light the bonfires, there would be beautiful like fires burning in the night everywhere. Such a beautiful image. So the Gemara says, "My mashma dimasi." So both say. So therefore, what the Mishnah just described was the process of bonfires. But again, important to recognize that process was stopped as soon as there was kusi interference. So says the Gemara, "My mashma dimasian lishna dikud." How do you know that masian is a lashon of burning? Where do you know that from? So the Gemara says, "Dichsiv." So the pasuk over here. The Gemara quotes the pasuk from Shmuel Beis, "Vayazu shames atzabeim, vayisaim David va'anashav." This is talking about Philistine idolatry. So the pasuk says David and his men vayisaim, they burned it. So you see over here that masian is a lashon of burning. Good. So the Gemara says "Mitagaminon va'okdinon David." David burned it. Tan Rabbanon. Suppose said this is very important halacha. When did they kindle bonfires? Only Rabbosai, in what we call a chaser month, right? Only in a month ultimately that was 29 days, where day number 30 was going to be Rosh Chodesh. That's when they would go ahead. That's what it means. Shnira bizmano lekadsho. So Rashi says over here, lekadsho. Actually, not yet. So the Gemara says, ve'imasem asiyin. And when would they kindle the bonfire? So we'll say. So this is very, very interesting. Remember again. So let's play this out. Let's say they see the new moon. They see the new moon on night 30. Right. So let's say, for argument's sake, right, Sunday night was night 30, which tells you that what they see. Let me say it differently. They see the new moon on night 30. Right? What does that tell you? That Sunday day was what? The last day of the month. Right? 29th day was last day of the month. And that means if they're seeing it Sunday night, Monday is Rosh Chodesh. Right? Sunday night, Monday is day number 30. So I will say, so therefore the Mishnah says they would only go ahead and kindle the bonfires when it was a 29-day month and day number 30 was Rosh Chodesh. And when would they burn the fire? This is very interesting. So think about this. Bonfires are only, this system is only meaningful when? What time of day? Nighttime. So they would end up kindling the bonfire, actually, interestingly enough, when? Night 31. No, remember again, you can't do it Sunday night. Remember, think about the timeline. If witnesses see the moon on night 31, night 30, which is Sunday night, right? So Sunday day was, let's just use Cheshvan. Very simple. Sunday is the 29th of Cheshvan. Okay, Sunday is the 29th of Cheshvan. They see the moon that night, Sunday night, which already is calendrically what? Day number 30. What happens? Then what happens? We know the process. What happens? The next day they go to Beis Din, right? We're going to see then what will be day 30. Beis Din declares Rosh Chodesh, which means day 30 is really day 1 of the next month, right? And then remember, when's the earliest you can light the bonfires? That night, which is really which night? Night 31. Night 31. So the Gemara says, when would you go ahead and kindle the bonfire? Lo or iburo, what we would call the intercalary day, the extra day. Now, the terms here are a little bit confusing, because remember again, essentially what it means is, when they light the bonfires on what effectively will be Monday night, which already calendarically is night 31, the bonfires essentially attest to what? That the previous day was Rosh Chodesh. Right? It's interesting because intuitively you would think that the bonfires come to alert everyone about the fact that Rosh Chodesh is tomorrow. That's actually not the case. The bonfires would alert everyone to the fact that Rosh Chodesh was that previous day. Lememra, da'chasra avdinan, amali lo avdinan. Shabbos says, so what do you see from here? You see from here that they only kindle the bonfires for a chaser, for a 29-day month. But also remember again, we know there's only two possibilities for the duration of the month, and they are 29 or 30. Those are the two possibilities. So the Gemara says, you see from here that they would only go ahead and kindle the bonfires for a chaser month, for a 29-day month. So just one more time. So again, just imagine that Sunday is the 29th day. Sunday night, the Eidim see the new moon. Rosh Chodesh, Mazel Tov. They make their journey to Beis Din, as we spoke about before. They show up to Beis Din presumably sometime on Monday, which is day number 30. Beis Din declares Rosh Chodesh. So Rosh Chodesh is day number 30. That night, which is night 31, they kindle the bonfires, alerting everyone that day 30 was Rosh Chodesh. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, my time. So you see from here, they only did the bonfires for a chasr, not for a malay. So my time, why is that? This is fascinating. I'm Rabbi Gezerah Mishum Rosh Chodesh Shechal Lios Be'erev Shabbos. This is fascinating, because what were they concerned about? They were concerned about the following case. What happens when Rosh Chodesh falls on a Friday? So listen to this. So let's play this out. Eimas Avdi. If Rosh Chodesh falls on Friday, when do you light the bonfire? Remember, I'm going to both say, is there a heter to be Mechal Shabbos to kindle the bonfires for Rosh Chodesh? No. The same way that there's no heter for the shluchim who go out to be Mechal Shabbos to spread the word to the diaspora, there's certainly no heter for the bonfires to be kindled on Shabbos. So if Rosh Chodesh falls out on Erev Shabbos, when technically would you light the bonfire? So on one hand, they'll say, Bafuki Shabbos, Matzah Shabbos. That's the earliest time to light the bonfire. Now here's the problem. Di amrit na'avid nami amalei. If you say that halacha l'maisa, we kindle the bonfires even for a 30-day month, for a malei, top of Chaf Gimel, asu l'mitei, the people could come to make a mistake. What's the mistake? Amri hay chaserhu, v'hay delo avid me'esmo mishum delo efshar. Shabbos say, here's the problem. When Rosh Chodesh falls out on Erev Shabbos, and they're not kindling the fires, the bonfires, until Motzei Shabbos, people won't know what to make of those bonfires. Remember, just to follow the flow. The Gemara says we only go ahead and kindle the bonfire for a chaser, for a 29-day month. The Gemara says, why? Why don't you just always kindle the bonfires? Always kindle the bonfires. And when people see the bonfires, what will they assume? That Rosh Chodesh was that day, was that previous day. What's the big deal? To which I'll tell you said, because it's a complicated case of when Rosh Chodesh falls on Erev Shabbos. Rosh Chodesh falls on Erev Shabbos, then you're going to kindle the fires. When the only thing you kindle the fire is Motzei Shabbos. When people see that fire, they don't know what to make of it. On one hand, they could say, well, maybe the month was really chaser. It was 29 days. And the only reason they waited until Motzei Shabbos to kindle the fire was why? Because you can't do it on Shabbos. Oh, Dilma Malihu. Or maybe not. Maybe Rosh Chodesh was declared on Shabbos. Maybe it really was declared on Shabbos. Or Bismano Avdu. And again, it was a Malay month. So I will say, because this way, you create confusion if you always kindle the bonfire. But if people know that the only time the bonfire is kindled is when it is a chaser, when it is a deficient month, it hopefully avoids the conclusion. So the Gemara says, so I don't understand. Why don't you just kindle the fire anytime, whether it's a 29-day month or a 30-day month? And if you're so worried about the Rosh Chodesh on Erev Shabbos piece, in that scenario, don't kindle the fire at all. Just don't light a fire in that situation. And since again you're not doing it on Motzei Shabbos, but you would normally do it on a Malay, people will infer that the month was a chaser. Afilu hachi, the Gemara says, even with that, asul lemiti, Amri hai malehu v'haidala avdi isnusehu de isnusei. So I was saying, people still won't know, because if you don't kindle a fire on Motzei Shabbos, people will not necessarily automatically assume that it's a chaser. Instead, what will they assume? Maybe there was some logistical issue, right? Maybe there was some problem that they were unable to go ahead and light the fires. So the Gemara says, so why don't you go ahead? So therefore, the Gemara says the only way to avoid confusion is to only light the bonfire when it's a chaser. That's the easiest thing. So whenever people see a bonfire, they know the previous month was 29 days, and day number 30 is Rosh Chodesh. So the Gemara says, okay, but why don't you then, I could flip that. In other words, the Gemara says, I'll buy the svara, I'll buy the logic that you only go ahead and light the bonfire for one type of month. But why does it have to be a chaser? Why don't you go ahead and light it for a month? That's a malay. And say we're only going to light the bonfires on months that are 30 days long, where day 31 is Rosh Chodesh. To which the Gemara says is incredible. Amar Abaye, mishum bitul malacha li am shnei yomim. Because Rabbi say, ultimately, again, what are we concerned about? We're specifically concerned about Rosh Hashana. Look at Rashi. Amar Abaye, mishum bitul malacha v'lo garsin gzeira I amrit navid amali v'lo chaser ein lecha Rosh Hashana shem izbatel b'nei agolim malacha shnei yomim shem hayom Rosh Hashana v'yom shloshim echad shem ibros chodesh. Listen to this. Because if you only do it on a mali, let's play this out for just a moment. If they only go ahead and kindle the bonfires on a 30-day month, what does that mean? That means that every single month, come day 30, you already have to anticipate the arrival of Rosh Chodesh, right? Because the bonfires wouldn't really come until when? Think about this. On a mali month, they wouldn't come until when? Right? They really wouldn't come until really night 32, right? If you think about it. So the Gemara says what's going to end up happening is people will de facto have to observe 2 days of Rosh Hashana. And I will say, now remember again, we already learned these sugyas about Rosh Hashana, Yom Arichta, but remember again, in a perfect world, Rosh Hashana is 1 day. The problem is if you're only kindling bonfires on a malay, people by definition will always have to just proactively keep 2 days of Rosh Hashana. You'll say to yourself, well, what's so bad about proactively keeping 2 days of Rosh Hashana if it might not be necessary? The Gemara says, Mishum bittul malacha, because it causes people not to work. And we don't want to go ahead and create unnecessary bittul malacha. So I'll say pretty incredible. So I'll just point out something very interesting over here, just on a hashkafic level as well. You know, it almost seems from the Gemara, the worst possible thing for a Jew is bittul malacha. Right? I will say there's nothing worse in life than being idle. Right? There's nothing worse in life than just waiting for something to happen. The Jew doesn't wait for things to happen. The Jew makes things happen. Even when it comes to Mashiach, we say, right, Achake lo b'chol yom sheyavo. I'll wait for him. Of course I'll wait for him. But at the end of the day, while I'm waiting, I'm also doing anything and everything in my power to expedite his arrival. So the Gemara says we can't just kindle the bonfires for malay months, because that is going to create the bittul malacha. And the notion of bittul malacha, the notion of being idle, the notion of not being proactive, the reality of not engaging in dynamic activity, that's something that Chazal did not want to institutionalize. And therefore I will say, halacha l'maisa, the Gemara says they would only kindle the bonfires for chaser months. Beautiful. Says the Gemara. So now remember again, the Mishnah said, what did this bonfire look like? So remember again, they would bring these poles. The Mishnah described the poles they would use. Amar Rav Yehuda, Dalid Mina Marazin. Suppose the Gemara just mentions this. By the way, there are 4 different types of cedar trees. 4 different types of cedar trees. Erez, Kasrum, Eitz Shemen, Ubrosh. Okay? 4 different types of cedars. So why are we bringing this up over here? Because the long poles of the torches were made from cedar wood. So once we started speaking about cedar wood, you lose yourself in cedar wood. You know, it's hard to stop once you start. Right? So the Gemara says as follows. Kasrum, so the Gemara is going to define each of these. Kasrum, Amrav Adra debe Rabbi Shila, Amri Mavliga, Va'amri la zu gulmish. Okay, so this is machlokes, exactly what type of wood, what type of tree this is. A Mavliga tree, a gulmish tree, Upliga de Rabba Baravuna, Amri Beirav, Asara mini arazim heim. So also listen to this. You have Rabbi Yehuda saying there are 4 types of cedars. This argues on Rav, because Rav holds that halacha l'maisa, right? Rav says that halacha, I should say, it argues on Rabba bar Rav Huna. Ultimately, again, Rabba Rav Huna says there are 10 types of cedar. Shnei Emar, quotes over here the pasuk from Yeshaya, Etin b'midbar erez, shita, v'hados, ve'etz shemen, osim ba'arava, b'rosh, tidhar uta'asher yachdov. So the Gemara says as follows. Let's analyze each of these. Erez, so in the pasuk says Erez, Arza, that refers to a cedar tree. Shita is Turinisa. Rashi says Turinisa Pina, it's a pine tree. Turinisa is a pine tree, right? Hadas, so Hadas, that one we know. Asa, myrtle. Eitz Shemen, it's Eitz Shemen, a farsama, balsam wood. Barosh, Barsa, which is translated as boxwood. Tidhar Shaga, which is a fir. Ta'ashar Shor Vina. And the Ta'ashar ultimately again is the Shorvina. Again, the Gemara doesn't define that one. Rashi doesn't define it. Hani Shiva Havu. But 1 second, that's only 7. That's only 7. So the Gemara says, Ki Aser Abdimi Amar Hosifu Aleim Alonim Amonim Almogin. Okay, we add on these additional 3. So the Gemara says, Alonin Butmi. Alonim are elm trees. Almonim Boloti are oak trees. Almogin Kisisa. Almogin is coral. And I will say this is actually very interesting. It actually says Kisisa min eitz haole bekarka hayam. So we'll say this is fascinating. So coral, of course, right? Coral, Rashi says, is the tree-like growth that grows on the seabed. That grows on the seabed. So we'll say this is absolutely beautiful. Ika da amri, aronim, armonim, almogin. Others say the other 3 types of cedars are again the aronim, armonim, almogin. Aronim, Ari, Aronim are Ari, we'll say Ari are laurel trees. Armonim, Dolvi, chestnut. Almogin, Kisisa. We'll say Kisisa once again means coral. So the Gemara says, we'll say, here we go. So Gemara quotes another pasuk. Pasuk once again from Yeshaya. Vitsi adir lo ya'avrenu. Now we'll say, now literally what this pasuk means is a large ship or a large boat shall not pass. So the Gemara says, Amarav, what's the big ship? What's the big boat that the Gemara is referring to over here? Nav is referring to over here. Zu Burni Gedola. This refers to the large Burni ship. So we'll say, what's happening? Get ready for this. Heichi Avdu. Now we'll say, when they used to try to go ahead and get coral off the seabed, how would they get coral off the seabed? Watch this. So the Gemara says, Maisi, they would take this big boat. Get ready for this. Maisu Shis Alfe Gabri, they would hire 6,000 men. Betreser Yarchi Shasa, 6,000 men for 12 months. 6,000 Va'amrila, Tresa Alfe Gabri, others say 12,000 men, Beshisa Yarchi, for 6 months. Either way, it's a lot of people for a long time. And the Gemara will say, what would they do? Listen to this. Vitani Lechala. So remember, you have to imagine the scene. They would take this big boat, 6,000 men for 12 months, 12,000 men for 6 months. And what would these men do? Vitani lechala. They would fill the boat with sand. Ad shachna until ultimately, again, the boat would sink. So they would sink the boat by piling on it a ton of sand. Rashi says over at the shachna, shuleha shoklim bekarkais hayam. So the boat, the walls of the boat would be submerged in the water. Va'odeno niras lamala. But interestingly enough, the top of the boat would still be visible above the water. He says something very interesting. At least again, their coral was often found in not very deep waters. So the interesting thing was, it appears the problem with harvesting coral was the fact that it had very deep roots in the seabed, and therefore again needed a lot of effort in order to pull it out. So look what they did. So they would go ahead and fill up a boat with sand, lower the boat to the seabed. What would they then do? Or at least lower it down towards the seabed. So the Gemara says, what would they do? V'nochis bar amoroi, and then they would have, bar amoroi says, Rashi says, melumad lashut benarus. They would hire divers. And what would the divers do? V'kater atuni de kisna bekisisa, v'kater lehu besinasa. So the Gemara said, what would they do? They would go ahead, divers would go down, they would take a linen rope, right? And they would tie one end of the rope to the coral and the other end of the rope to the top of the ship. And then what would they do? V'not lichala, then the guys would come back and they would begin to shovel off the sand. And as they would shovel off the sand, what would happen? And what would happen, of course, when you remove the sand from the boat begins to rise to the top. And as the boat rises to the top, what does it do? It pulls the coral out along with it. Absolutely incredible. And the coral was so expensive. Umachlif al chad trein bekaspa. One piece of coral was worth 2 pieces of silver. Tlas parvasa havyon. There were 3 different port areas in which they mined, harvested coral. Tarti be aramai. So it was interesting enough to change it in the Hagos it's Yonah, they changed it to Romai. 2 of them were Roman ports. V'chad de be parsoi, and one of them was a Persian port. The be aramai maskin kesisa. Right, in the Roman port, they were able to go ahead and harvest coral. The be parsoi maskin marginaisa. Interestingly enough, in the Persian port, they weren't really harvesting coral. They were harvesting, sounds like oysters, right? They were harvesting pearls, right? Pearls. Omekaria parvasa de mishanig, and they called it the port of the king. Rashi says, Omekaria parvasa de mishanig, osa shal parsium, the Persian port, where they were able to go ahead and they were able to draw up pearls. It was called Namal Shal Malucha, the port of the monarchy. I'll just mention, and by the way, so what's the connection over here? Just see, trace the progression. We started talking about cedars in the Mishnah, right? Because that's what the torches were made of. We spoke about all the different kinds of cedars, and included in this whole discussion of strong trees was also something called coral. So once the Mishnah started, Kesisa, once the Gemara started talking about Kesisa, we started speaking about, again, how to harvest coral. So I'll just tell you something. I was looking at this Gemara yesterday. This Gemara is such a profound metaphor for life. Because think about this for just a moment. What is the Gemara describing? The Gemara is describing over here a boat that is weighed down with sand. And then something amazing happens. Once you begin to remove the sand, the boat becomes buoyant, right? And when it becomes buoyant, what happens? It brings with it so much other bracha. It's able to lift the coral off the seabed. I will say, the boat is a metaphor for us. So often in life, we are weighed down by a variety of different things. There is so much sand in life. There's the sand of negative relationships, toxic relationships. There's the sand of negative midos. There's the sand of just wrong ideas and hashkafas and flawed outlooks on life. And too often in life, we hold on to the sand. So if you hold on to the sand, you're stuck on the seabed. You can't go anywhere. But if you find the courage to shovel out your sand, right? If you find the courage to unload the baggage, if you find the courage to get rid of the things that I know are holding me back, first of all, you feel 1,000,000 pounds lighter. Second of all, you float to the top. And as you begin to float to the top, you bring all of that positivity and blessing with you. Life is about offloading the sand from your boat. Because once you find the courage to do so, there's no telling what bracha you will find and what you will accomplish in life. Such an incredible idea. Rabbi Yochanan says, Kol shita v'shita shenatlu nachem Yerushalayim. We'll say this is such a beautiful Gemara, and it's a schos. So we'll say, today, Baruch Hashem, November 1st, Eretz Yisrael is open. From what I've been told, the airlines don't know that yet, but at least that is what the government has said. Hashem, they say crazy stories. People are stranded in airports because apparently there's a lack of communication between the government. But Baruch Hashem, it's open. It's open. And Halavai, we should never experience what we experienced over the last year and a half, where Eretz Yisrael was not open to us anytime and every time we wanted to go. And it's certainly something we have to do a real cheshbon hanefesh. Because for the first time, I think in our lifetimes, we really felt what it's like to be in Galus and not have access to your homeland. So Halavai, we should be Zocheh Miras Hashem, that the doors of our beloved homeland should constantly be wide open, and in Miras Hashem, we should be Zocheh to take advantage of the opportunity. So the Gemara says as follows, Rabbi Yochanan, Kol shita v'shita shenatlu nachem Yerushalayim. Every tree that the Gentiles went ahead and removed from Yerushalayim, because also remember again when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, right? So there were trees. So every pine tree, every tree that was removed from Yerushalayim, isn't this beautiful? The Ribono Shel Olam will replant every single last tree that was removed by the Goyim who persecuted us and destroyed our land. Shneimar, etein b'midbar erez shita, ve'in midbar erez ele Yerushalayim. We'll say interesting enough. So the pasuk, like we spoke about before, this is the pasuk in Yeshayahu. Right, I'll go ahead and place it in the midbar erez shita. So the Gemara says midbar refers to Yerushalayim. Shneimar Tzion midbar haisa. Va'am Rabbi Yochanan. Kalalome Torah ve'inam alamda. So we'll say another drush on this pasuk. So beautiful. Anyone who learns Torah but doesn't teach it to others, which means if you learn but you keep your learning to yourself. We'll say inam alam doesn't mean you have a shir you give. What it means is if a person learns but they don't share their learning with anyone, dama lahadas b'midbar. Such a person is comparable to a myrtle, to a hadas, to a myrtle in the desert. Now we'll say, now what's the chap? Right? What benefit does the fragrance of a myrtle have when it's in the desert? And the answer is none, because there's no one there to smell it. A person who learns Torah becomes fragrant, has all of this beautiful fragrance, but if you don't share it with anyone, right? And I will say sharing it with anyone, by the way, like I said, doesn't mean you have to assemble throngs of Talmidim or start giving a shir. It means you go home, you share it with a spouse, you share it with a friend, you share it with you share it with someone. You use your Torah to positively impact someone else, and if you don't, you're just like the beautiful myrtle in the desert. It's fantastic, but no one gets benefit from it. Both said, listen to this, Igadarmi, an alternate version. Kalalome Torah umalamda b'makom she'in tamdi chachamim. Listen to this. A person who learns Torah, umalamda, and teaches it to others, in a place where there are no Torah scholars, dome lahadas b'midbar dechaviv, is comparable to a myrtle in the desert. This is a reverse drasha. You see, on the other hand, a myrtle in the desert also stands out for its beauty. Right? It's so recognizable, because the landscape is so barren. So when you have that one little myrtle, it's so beautiful. So the Gemara compares that to a person who learns Torah and teaches Torah in a place where there are no other Talmidei Chachamim. So if you teach Torah, you give over Torah in a place where there is no Talmid Chacham, you are like the myrtle in the desert. Your beauty stands out against the barren landscape. It's so beautiful. So we'll say, bottom line is, share your Torah. Share your Torah. So incredibly important. People sometimes think to themselves, who am I to teach Torah? Every person can teach Torah. Every person. Some people do it in a classroom, some people do it in a base medrash, and some people just do it one-to-one. Some people do it at a Shabbos table, some people do it at a weeknight dinner table. It doesn't make a difference where, right? Some people do it by the water cooler, depending on where you work, right? I'll say, but bottom line is, there's always Torah to be shared. And when you do that, you are like the fragrant hadas sharing your fragrance. But if you just hold it for yourself, it's nice for you, but there's something lacking in your Torah. So the Gemara goes right to Rabbi Yochanan, woe to the Ovdei Kocham, to the idolaters, for they have no redemption. Shene Emar, Tachas Hanachoshes Avi Zahav. Go Gemara, we're quoting the pasuk from Yeshaya. Tachas Hanachoshes Avi Zahav. Instead of the copper, I will bring gold. V'tachas habarzel avi kesef, and instead of the iron, I will bring silver. V'tachas ha'itzim nechoshes, and instead of wood, I will bring copper. V'tachas ha'avonim barzel, and instead of stones, I will bring iron. Tzvi say this pasuk over here is referring to the fact that in the Messianic era, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will repay us for all of the wealth that was taken from us by the Ovdei Kochavim over the generations. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, not only will I give it back to you, I'll give you more than you ever lost. So financially, we will be made whole in the Messianic era. So the Gemara says, but listen to this, we'll say this is so profound. Batachas Rabbi Akiva v'Yachaverav Ma'imavim. I will say, what can you ever give to replace a Rabbi Akiva and his friends? Right? What can you ever give to replace 6 million Kedoshim? What can you ever give to Klal Yisrael to replace all that has been taken from us over the generations? V'aleim hu omer v'nikesam damam lo nikesi. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says something amazing. Klal Yisrael, I'll make you whole. I'll make you whole from all of the material things that were taken from you. And not only will I make you whole, but I'll give you back even more. But Rabbi Akiva, for his friends, for everyone else who Klal Yisrael has been deprived of from the years, how could I ever make that whole? Which I will say is very interesting. Because when Mashiach comes, one of the elements of Messianic redemption is what? Is Tchias HaMesim. Tchias HaMesim. So everyone does come back. But HaKadosh Baruch, I think what the Gemara is saying is the pain, the existential pain of Klal Yisrael, of having endured loss over the generations. The pain doesn't go away. Rabbi Akiva comes back. The 6 million Kedoshim come back. But the pain that was suffered by people throughout the generations, the pain doesn't go away. And it's the pain that the nations of the world are held accountable for when Mashiach comes. Isn't that incredible? The financial piece, HaKadosh Baruch Hu could give compensation, but the pain caused by the nations of the world, the pain caused by the Gentile nations, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, V'nikesi damam lo nikesi. Ultimately, again, I cannot go ahead and cleanse them, the nations of the world, of the blood they have spilled. Incredible. And from where did they light these fires? Mi base Baltin. My base Baltin. What's base Baltin? Amirav Zubiram. It's the first Abiram. My Gola. What's the Gola? So I'll say, so remember again, it said the entire Gola would be illuminated at night. What Gola? What do I ask we're referring to? Amrav Yosef Zu Pumpadisa. That refers to the city of Pumpadisa and Babel. My Kimedura Saish, what does it mean ultimately? Again, the diaspora was like one big torch. It's so beautiful. Tana, Kol Echad ve'echad nota lavuka biyadav all the Rosh kago. Both say this is incredible. That it says every single Jew, right? Every person went up to the top of his rooftop, and he took an avuka, right? He took a torch, right? And the Gemara here, he would wave the torch. So again, remember, in Eretz Yisrael they weren't doing this, because in Eretz Yisrael this could be very disruptive. In Eretz Yisrael they had the mountain system. But once they got to the edge of Eretz Yisrael, the diaspora would set a glow, because in diaspora, every single Jew would just get up on his rooftop and start waving his torch. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Omer, Avcharim, V'kayar, V'gader, V'chavrosel. So Rabbi Shimon adds in additional places where they would, it sounds like in Eretz Yisrael, where they would also go ahead, and Rashi says, Avcharim, V'kayar, V'gader. We'll say Gader is what we just had in yesterday's daf. Shazefer, right? Shazefer was the head of the city of Gader. So Rashi says over here, and also these places, Hayu Masin HaMasuas Barashi Haram Shalom. They would also light torches on the top of these mountains. Ike Da'amri, Beni Ubeni Havukaimi. Some say that these places that were just listed are in between the locations mentioned in the Mishnah. Others say this was on the other side of Eretz Yisrael. Mar Chashav the High Gisa, Umar Chashav the High Gisa. The Mishnah listed a series of mountains in one direction, and ultimately, Shimon Elazar is mentioning a mountain, a series of mountains in a different direction, which makes sense. Meaning they kindled the fires, the torches in two different directions. Rabbi Yochanan. So I'll say, first I'll just point out, what a beautiful imagery, right? So you have a bunch of mountains in Eretz Yisrael, and then ultimately the entire diaspora is aglow. Everything looked aglow. Both say, you have to understand something. When is there light in the world? When the Jews of Eretz Yisrael and the Jews of the Galus work together. Right? Ultimately, there's only light in the world when all of Am Yisrael is working in the same direction. It's not enough for the Jews of Eretz Yisrael to produce light. That's not enough light for the world. It's not enough light for the Jews of Galus, of Bavel, to produce light. Not enough light for the world. But when the Jews of Eretz Yisrael start kindling on a couple of mountaintops and they ignite the flame, it's Kimi Tzion Teitzi Torah. The flame always comes from Eretz Yisrael. The flame always comes from there. But all it takes is a flame from Eretz Yisrael, and the entire diaspora could be ignited as well. But the light is only truly luminescent when all of Klal Yisrael comes together. Like everything else that's good in this world requires the achdus of Am Yisrael, Bnei Eretz Yisrael, Bnei Hagola, to be working together. Rabbi Yochanan, Ben Kol Achas VaAchashona Parasot. So we'll say very interesting, between each mountain, these mountains were strategically spaced. there are 8 parsos. So just to understand the parsa, let's go with right now 3 miles. A little bit of machlok is how big a parsa is, but let's go 3 miles, which means I will say there's about, we'll call it 20 miles, 24 miles in between each mountain. Each mountain. So the Gemara says, Kama havalu, tlasin v'tartin. Which means again, so there were 32 parsos, right from beginning to end. 32 parsos from beginning to end. So I'll say this is incredible. So remember again, if you go through the mountains, right, if you go from mountain A to the last mountain mentioned in the Mishnah, that's 32 parsos, right, which is almost 100 miles, right, almost 100 miles. So the Gemara said, but 1 second, if you try to travel these distances today, it's much longer than 32 parsos. Right? In other words, if I try to go from mountain A to mountain, Hara Mishcha to Sartava, Sartava to this, so it's much longer than that. It's much longer than 8 parsos. So we'll say, listen to this. Amar Abaye, Astume istatim luhu. Darchai. Ultimately, the roads have become much more convoluted. In other words, what's the lashon? If you fly as the crow flies, if you go straight, it's 8 parsos. But now, we used to apparently have roads that were straight. But now the roads have become much more circuitous and crooked. So we'll say, so this is actually quite beautiful. The Gemara here quotes from the Pasuk in Hosea. The Pasuk says, I have gone ahead and literally, Sach es darkeich basirim, which means I've made your road more convoluted with obstacles. So we'll say, this is talking, my roads have become twisted. Rabbi said, this is referring to the aftermath of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. The Navi is lamenting the fact that the roads, the pathways, have become more circuitous. And Rabbi says, so therefore again, they used to have straight paths. Straight paths would make it 8 parsos in between each mountain. But now, since the Beis HaMikdash has been destroyed, the roads are much more circuitous, and therefore it takes longer to get to between each mountain. Which I will say, also such an incredible yesod. What's the power? What's the impact of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash? When the Beis HaMikdash was in this world, and I'm sure we'll experience again, there's a Gilui Hashchina, right? There is a level of divine revelation that is present in this world. And when there is a Hashras Hashchina, divine revelation, or again a manifestation of divine in the world, there is greater clarity in this world. You know, I don't know what the power of a Beis HaMikdash is. When the Ribono Shel Olam has a home in this world, there by definition is greater clarity in this world. By extension, when the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, that clarity is not here. You want to know why we live in a world of such gray? We live in a world where so often we lack clarity in our own personal lives, with our mishpachos, in our communities. Like, what should we do? What shouldn't we do? There's often this lack of clarity. Lack of clarity is a result of the lack of the Beis HaMikdash. That's what the Navi is saying. When the Beis HaMikdash is in this world, you know what the roads look like? Yashar, Yashar, Yashar. It's straight. In the absence of the Beis HaMikdash, everything becomes so circuitous. Everything is so twisty and turny. Nothing seems to be straight. And that's what we daven for every single day. V'Yerushalayim ircha berachamim tosha v'sechazena einenu b'shuvcha l'tzion. Why do we want the Beis HaMikdash? Why do we want Geula? Why do we want Mashiach? Because you know what? I'm so tired of traveling the convoluted roads of life. I just need clarity. I just need clarity. I just need to know where I should go, what I should do, and the derech I should take in life. And that day will come. That clarity will come in Meir Hashem with Mashiach Tzidkiyim Meir Rabbi Yameinu. We'll say, let's go to the Mishnah. Chatzir Gidol Haizu Yerushalayim. Chatzir Gidol. So we'll say, so this is actually beautiful. So remember again, we're jumping back now for just a moment. We spoke about in yesterday's daf that the Eidim are permitted to Mechal Shabbos in order to come and give testimony. So where would they show up? There was a large gathering point. A large courtyard in Yerushalayim. Ubeis Yazik Haisenik Grace. It was called Beis Yazik. That was the name of it. So the Gemara says, Ulasham Kol Ha'idim Miskansim. All of the witnesses would gather into this courtyard. Ubeis Din Bodkin Osam Sham. And that's where Beis Din also would interrogate or cross-examine the witnesses. Usuudos Kidolos Osin Lohem. And they used to make mamish beautiful seudos. It must have been very beautiful, right? Big seudos, big carving stations, right? Everything in this Chatzar Gedola in Yerushalayim. Why? Why do they want to do it? B'shil shiyu ragilin lava barishona. I will say, by the way, isn't it fascinating how some things don't change, right? Meat and wine, and you'll get men to do anything, right? So I'll say, right, just go ahead. I mean, they don't say the wine, but it's suda, so pashtos, again, although the wine is probably a little bit of a tricky part, especially if you need people to give eidos, right? Although the eidos, I'm sure, is much more flowery after a couple of l'chaim. So I'll say, so they had these sudos gidolos, these large sudos over here in these courtyards. So the Gemara says, Lo hayuzazin misham kalayom. Now I will say, here's what's interesting. So remember again, the witnesses, once they arrived in this large courtyard, they were not permitted to leave the courtyard. Because remember again, Bepashtos, many of these witnesses had traveled from where? From where? Outside of the Tchum. Now let's harken back to our Eruvin days. I know many of you yearn and pine for Eruvin every day. Hey, so remember again, what happens if you leave your Tchum on Shabbos? What happens? Dal Ramas. That's all you have. So here's what's interesting. A lot of these guys who came and showed up had left their tchum. So because of that, they were confined to this courtyard. So there was a lot of good food, beautiful sudos, but there was a lack of mobility. They could not move past the courtyard. Hiskin Rabbi Gamliel Azakin Shumahalchin Alpayim Amalach Ruach. Rabbi Gamliel Azakin instituted that no, essentially, they should have the tchum like the residents of Yerushalayim. They came to Yerushalayim with the reshus of the Beis Din, and therefore they should not be confined to the courtyard. Instead, they have the tchum of the people of Yerushalayim, 2,000 amis in every direction. So the Gemara says, by the way, not just these guys, but this applies to anyone who leaves their tchum with reshus. If you leave your tchum with reshus, you're allowed to leave your tchum on Shabbos because of some extenuating circumstance. We give you essentially a new tchum. A new tchum, for example, the Gemara says, a midwife. Let's say a midwife goes to aid a woman in giving birth, and as a result, she leaves her tchum. She comes to a woman to help her give birth. Both say, that's sakanas nefashis, you're allowed to do that. We give the midwife now a new tchum. They both say, a new tchum where she is. Or you're coming to save someone from a fire, or min hagayis, or from robbers, or min hanar, from a river, or min amapoles, or from a building collapse. So we'll say it's a fascinating halacha. Essentially, when you leave your tchum, but you are halachic, it's halachically permissible. Not only halachically permissible, it's what? Halachically encouraged. So again, Chazal didn't want to penalize you, right? So therefore, what they said is, you have a new tchum, like the city in which you find yourself. I will say, the idea is, you have to incentivize people to do the right thing. Because this is incredibly important, Yisod. If doing the right thing becomes too difficult, what ends up happening? People just don't do it. So therefore, again, if you're going to tell a person, you could leave your tchum, but once you leave, you're stuck in your Daled Amis, people are just not going to come. Therefore, Gamliel felt that Allah Chalamaysa, if somebody's leaving their tchum for the right purposes, give them the tchum of the city in which they find themselves. So we'll have to stop over here for today. We'll pick up with this Gemara, incredible Gemara tomorrow as well. The next couple of years are incredible, right? Each mamish, it just gets better each and every day. Shkoyach. And I see over here, Reb Jerry, Mazel Tov on your new anacle. Mazel Tov. Jerry will ask his grandson there, Yisrael. Mazel Tov. We should be zochel legal Torah lechupel l'maisim tovim, lachnisa beviso shalom avinu bizmano. Mazel Tov.